Hi, everyone. And just by coincidence, Radish Raven Ingrid has published a lengthy video, comprehensively on the topic of labels, and with her labels as INFP and her autism spectrum diagnosis. As it turns out, yesterday I was looking to put something together on the topic of what ultimately I decided would have to be about labels, but Ingrid's beat me to it. That said, I have a couple of variations on what she has talked about, which is in part my own confession, in part maybe something educational, and in part something just for my own edification. The confession part being that a couple of weeks ago, I came across a very large study that told me more things about myself that I wasn't aware. And I'm sort of trying to put together the pieces and explain it to myself. That is, I'm a member of what I believe is a group, or I assign myself a label of being part of INFPs. But then I have had another label which I didn't think had much meaning to it, much serious meaning to it, which is that I am mixed-handed or have hand confusion. And I've kind of thought in the past that there's some sort of a correlation between the two and a number of other kind of neurological, psychosomatic, and related issues that I've experienced. Thankfully, none of them serious, mostly just weird quirks. But with the preface that I consider myself to be neurotypical for the most part. Maybe a little eccentric, but still well within the realm of what people would consider normal human behavior. I don't believe that I am on a spectrum. I don't believe that I have a mental illness. I'm hopeful, or I consider myself blessed, that I have not had to deal with many of the difficulties that many people do have to deal with in their lifetime. That all said, this label that I do have of being mixed-handed or having hand confusion, there's even some confusion about the prevalence of what it means to have this. And from what I can tell, this is just my guess, but it's 90% or the majority of people are right-handed. About 10% of people are left-handed. About 1% of people are ambidextrous. And then somewhere from 1% of people upwards, carved out from the right and left-handed, are this non-dominant, cross-dominant, mixed-handed subset. Many of them with having kind of relatively minor cross-dominance. For instance, there's tests available online to see if you favor your left eye or your right eye. And there's easy ways to tell if you favor your left hand or your right hand, or left leg or right leg. And generally, you do most activities favoring that dominant eye, hand, leg. So it's usually lined up on one side for people who are exclusively right-handed, on the other side for people who are exclusively left-handed. But then there's a little bit of mixing that happens. So there can be folks that have left eye and right hand, and it tends to be pretty stable. I'm not that. I am of a particular group, which might be as little as 1%, might be more. It's kind of hard to tell because the definitions are fluid, and it is sort of a spectrum of left to right. Someone who's kind of right in the middle. I throw with my left hand, I write with my right. I use utensils with left hand. I would do something like soldering or other detail work with my right. So like working on a puzzle would be with my right hand. With two-handed tasks, something requiring strength would be left-handed. If I were to use a rifle, a two-handed gun, it would be left-handed. But a pistol, I would probably use my right hand, but I favor my left eye. So it really comes down to this little dance I have to do whenever I pick up a new tool to figure out, does it work this way or does it work that way? Which hand wants to do this task? And then sometimes there's a sort of a hiccup where I am accustomed to doing certain things with one hand and I'll do it with the other without thinking about it. And then it's like, oh, that's not right. That doesn't work. And have to rethink or give it conscious thought to sort out what I'm actually trying to do and how I best do it. There's a video I'll link to where somebody described this as ambidextrous being like identical twins. Your two hemispheres are able to do the same thing. They're coordinated and the talent kind of goes across both sides, whereas the mixed dominance is more like fraternal or paternal twins, where they're related, but each one is something different, and they are potentially at points competing with one another because they're just not the same. They're not identical. Anyway, none of this has much of a direct impact on life other than being a funny little quirk. But then I've come across a number of things in this new study that said that it's not being right-handed or being left-handed that will give you the prevalence of all sorts of mental illnesses and neurological disorders. It's people who have this mixed-handedness who end up most likely to have all sorts of potential different issues. I won't get into all of them because there's a bunch. Disabilities, neurological disorders, mental illness, things, all of which are tied to this concept. And I believe it maps back to this lovely little phrase of failure to establish cerebral asymmetry, meaning instead of in embryonic through early childhood development, having one hemisphere that does, having everything mapped the way it usually should be, that its language is here and logic is here and creativity is there, or having the reverse of that asymmetry for people who are strongly left-handed, where it's the same thing but just a mirror image. It's sort of a mapping of different bits in different places without a whole lot of standard organization for where things ought to go. And what that means is you have a corpus callosum, that is the section that connects the two parts of the cerebrum, that is highly active in order to try and do a lot of traffic between sections that usually would be in the same hemisphere of the brain, but in this case are in different places. All of this is a very long way of saying that I have thought of myself as being a relatively standard INFP. I have been so arrogant as to hold myself up as an example to use as a template to look at others and make a determination whether their INFP qualities, whether they qualify for this INFP category. Not myself exclusively, but I've looked at myself as one of the templates to understand whether or not other people are INFPs. Well, with this mixed-handedness comes a certain kind of neurological quirk that probably influences my own flavor of thinking about how I manifest as an INFP. And it stands to reason that there are a lot of people who have regular neurological development that have the same cognitive stack, but may exhibit it in somewhat different, in different ways. They're not going to have the experience that I have. And I've been holding people to that experience, and that's a wrong thing to do. So that is by way of a confession that I may not be the best template for what an INFP is supposed to look like. And I will say as a caveat that, again, while people who are mixed-handed have the kind of higher preponderance for all sorts of other things that can go wrong, I consider myself fortunate enough that I have not, I don't have any of those serious conditions. Some of the health stuff is, I'll deal with it as it comes. So anyway, here I am swapping one set of labels for another and saying, well, maybe the original set of labels is not as valid as I potentially thought. But there you go. Mixed-handedness, hand confusion. It's kind of a silly little parlor trick until it gets serious. But I'm fortunate and grateful to say that in my case, it is not a big deal. But it does mean that the labels that you may apply for INFP are equally valid to the labels that I had been using. And once again, I should be more careful in how I look at others and try to assess their cognitive preferences in relation to my own. Anyway, thanks for listening. And with that, I will sign off. Bye for now.